I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. We hear these words from the new human who sits on his throne in glory, gathering all the nations of the world before him. We hear these words at the end of Matthew's Gospel as we close the book on this year of Matthew. But we'll open the book of Luke at the Christmas Eve Mass, and we'll hear a similar challenge. For Mary gave birth to her firstborn son, wrapped him in bands of cloth, and laid him in a manger because there was no place for them in the inn. At the end of Luke's Gospel, we meet the stranger again after the resurrection. Jesus comes upon two disciples on the road to Emmaus. They're talking with each other about all the things that happened to Jesus, but they don't recognize that this stranger who is walking with them is Jesus. But then, something strange happens. When they invite Jesus to come in and stay with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. And then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. The stranger is a stranger no longer. They see him now as their host. As we were reminded in the letter to the Hebrews, do not forget to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. Jesus comes to us in disguise, in foreigners and refugees, in the homeless and the outcasts, in the prisoner and the hungry. Matthew 25 is about the strangeness of a God who comes to us in strangers. In chapter 26 of Matthew's Gospel, the Passion begins at the Last Supper. So we practice hospitality because Jesus is the host who washes feet and breaks bread at the table, handing over his life in love. So we've learned to open our lives to create space to welcome. But we also practice hospitality because Jesus is the guest. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. Maybe Christian hospitality is strongest when the lines of host and guest are blurred. We learn to welcome others, yet we are also willing to be welcomed by them. Over and over again, Jesus comes to us in disguise, yet over and over we miss seeing Jesus. The very people Jesus names in today's gospel, the prisoner, the homeless, the hungry, are named precisely because we do not see them. Strangers take us out of our relational comfort zone. The God who comes to us in strangers makes us feel anxious and awkward, even though we know that the people of God are called to be a people of hospitality. In the book of Leviticus, God commands us, "You shall love the alien who lives among you as yourself. For you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God." But the strangeness of strangers makes hospitality hard. Hospitality has to begin in the heart. When we fear strangers, we erect walls and obstacles to keep them out. But these external walls originate with a failure of the heart, with a wall erected within our souls. This fear of strangers is called xenophobia, a word that combines the Greek word for stranger, xenos, with phobia, the word for fear. But interestingly, in the Greek, xenos doesn't just mean a stranger. If you invite the stranger into your home, they are now your guest. So xenos can mean either stranger or guest, depending on the context. By contrast, the biblical word for hospitality is philoxenia, which combines xenos with another Greek word, philia, which you probably know from the city of Philadelphia It's the Greek word for brotherly love. Hospitality begins in the heart. Instead of phobia, Christians are called to extend philia to strangers. But hearts are not easily changed. Hospitality, before it can be anything else, begins as the emotional battle to widen the circle of our affections. Hospitality begins as a spiritual discipline, as a habit-forming practice aimed at expanding the bandwidth of our kindness and compassion. Our emotions change when we begin to adopt practices that slowly, over time, reconfigure our feelings and affections. Our annual St. Nicholas Day project next Saturday is one of those spiritual practices designed to open our arms and our hearts. When we dare to step into the world of the stranger, we discover that they are strangers no longer. As anyone who has ever stepped out of their comfort zone to accompany someone will tell you, they come away being ministered to. As they learn from walking on holy ground, they find that they are the ones who have been welcomed. In his new book, Stranger God, Richard Beck describes the small, everyday practices of welcome and hospitality, known as the little way from St. Therese of Lisieux. These practices take the controls away from what Beck calls our social autopilot. When we're on social autopilot, we allow our unchecked feelings to pull us towards some people, but away from others. As Dorothy Day once said, we love God only as much as the person we love the least. Therese described how in her convent she would detour around sisters she found disagreeable, but how her desire to love as Jesus loved caused her to stop detouring around, to welcome the hard-to-love sisters with a kind smile and a warm greeting. Refusing to detour around hard-to-love people reshapes the social emotions that cause us to avoid and turn away from each other. The little way is a habit-forming discipline that enables us to encounter the God who comes to us in disguise and trains us to entertain angels unawares. Christ, our King, St. Paul wrote, has broken down the dividing wall between us, reconciling both groups to God and bringing peace in one body through the cross, thus putting to death that hostility through it. So then, you are no longer strangers. Christ gathers us together as members of the household of God, saints with the saints in heaven.